Hello, everyone, and welcome to the final episode of Near and Rupar of 2025. Thank you so much for bearing with us. We were delayed in getting started because Donald Trump had a press conference that Aaron had to cover. And of course, it started late and ran long. And believe it or not, that actually is going to tie into the theme of this week's episode, where we are recapping a wild and very strange year that really presented two extremely different faces. On the one hand, Donald Trump has amassed unprecedented power. He has done any number of illegal things and gotten away with them. He has wreaked terrible damage and destruction on institutions in America and abroad. He has instilled fear in so many Americans and American institutions. And there's no sign of it stopping. In fact, if anything, it's only getting worse. Yet at the same time, Donald Trump is deeply, deeply unpopular. Republicans keep losing elections and performing very poorly in the elections they do manage to win. And the GOP is also in serious disarray. We have seen that House Speaker Mike Johnson has completely lost control of his caucus. And there's also a ton of GOP infighting over the anti-Semitism that the far right has allowed to infiltrate its party. So you really have this two-faced situation of tremendous power being consolidated by Donald Trump and also a Republican Party that is a total mess. And I think maybe nothing encapsulated that better than the absolutely unhinged, even for Trump, primetime television address that he gave just this week. And Aaron, you have a window into that like few people do.
Yeah, for sure. And to begin with, let me apologize to our viewers for the delay. I did try to communicate on social channels what was going on, but I know that people aren't necessarily as plugged into social media as I am. But long and short of it, I mean, this is a little bit maybe of inside baseball, but one thing that I've had to adapt to in Trump 2.0 is that the daily guidance, which goes out either in the evening or early in the morning, detailing what the president's activities will be for a given day, is totally unreliable at this point. So the event today was supposed to start at noon, and it was, an event that typically isn't the type that gets super delayed because it was making a specific policy announcement with pharmaceutical company CEOs kind of flanking Trump. But it got delayed for an hour, and then it got delayed for 15 minutes. And, kind of tying into a lot of the topics that we will get to later in the episode, one thing that was jarring at the very end of the event is, as our window here at 3 p.m. Eastern to start the show approached, I pinged David and told him, hey, look, let's start this as soon as Trump wraps, but he's about to take questions and I can't miss this because, of course, today is the day that the Epstein files are supposed to be released. And then in a very unusual twist, Trump at the end of the event did not take questions. And he tried to frame this around, this has been such a monumental event with all these pharmaceutical companies who are agreeing to give us most favored nation pricing on our drugs that I couldn't possibly step on that by taking questions today, which of course, nobody believes that for a second. So I'm not exactly sure what he's afraid of. I don't want to get too sidetracked here, but it was very notable. And by the time people listen to this, it'll be maybe a little bit of old news, so I don't want to go too far down this path with the Epstein file stuff. Deputy AG Todd Blanche, who has been kind of a key player in this, he was the one who met with Ghislaine Maxwell ahead of her getting kind of a sweetheart arrangement. They talked together, and then Maxwell kind of exonerated Trump, and now she's at a low security, it's called like Club Fed in Texas that has pretty cushy conditions. And they dispatched Blanche this morning to Fox and Friends, where he's ostensibly talking about kind of crime and this and that. But at the end, they asked him about the Epstein files. And oftentimes when Republicans or Trump officials go on these sorts of shows, you can tell that they're kind of like, there's collusion that happens before the interview where they kind of know what the topics are going to be. And you could tell that this was like a planned question on Epstein. And it made a lot of news. Actually, I saw this getting picked up all over the place because what he basically said was, we need to make extra careful that we are protecting all of the victim identities. And so we're releasing thousands of files today, but then we're releasing more on kind of a rolling basis going forward, which is illegal. The law that was signed into law by Trump mandated that the files be released today. So he's basically admitting that they're going to be breaking the law. Now, the law that was signed by Trump doesn't really have any sort of teeth to it. There's no enforcement mechanism. So, now it's going to be kind of another slugfest. It'll probably go to the courts in some capacity, but who knows? So my sense, and, we should put out a call here to our viewers that if this changes while we are live, please let us know in the comments. I was even refreshing just moments before we started to see if the files had hit, and based on 10 minutes ago they had not. But my strong sense is that there's going to be a highly redacted release of files today that will be incomplete, that probably won't contain any big bombshells, because they're clearly still all in on doing everything they can to protect Trump. So anyway, that's kind of the backdrop for why we're late today, and I thank everybody for kind of bearing with us as the show moved back into the afternoon. But to get back to, I believe it was Tuesday night, right? Trump's bizarre speech, during prime time, where, again, I don't want to get into armchair diagnoses, but I saw a lot of speculation about whatever sort of upper he might have been on as he yelled at us for 18 minutes. And, there's maybe a sense in which, because I did see that like on, I believe it was CBS, and this shows people how out of touch I am with TV programming these days. And I believe it was Survivor had like their series finale,
Yeah.
which I think was on CBS. And so I saw some informed speculation that there's probably some strong arming from CBS execs, like, hey, you got 20 minutes, but hurry this up. And so there was kind of a sense that Trump basically tried to do like a half an hour speech in 20 minutes to get out of there, before the networks maybe cut him off or something like that. But there was also, it was just a weird overall event because, some people probably saw there was photographs and reporting from earlier in the day that Marco Rubio was spotted in the Oval Office, like nervously pacing around and waiting for Trump to return from some meeting that he was at. And this came on the heels, I believe it was even earlier that day, where Trump made remarks to reporters about how we want the oil back from Venezuela, and they took our oil. And so there was kind of this sense that, maybe this is going to be really kind of like a doomsday thing where he's going to get in front of the nation and say that tonight I'm launching military strikes on Venezuela. He had openly said in the days leading up to this that land strikes would be beginning imminently in Venezuela. And so that was my big concern, was that this whole thing was kind of like, an occasion for Trump to basically try to prime the country for, if not war, then at least like, right up to to be clear, doing a blockade on a country is an act of war. So that there's a lens through which we're already at war with Venezuela. We're committing acts of war against them. But that he would say something like, oh, the planes are in the air now to bomb Venezuela or something like that. And that did not happen. So, I was kind of wondering, like, did something change over the course of the day, or were people just kind of speculating wildly? There was never anything to that. But, it was one of those instances that for me, people, I think the normie voters that decide elections, they don't have Trump necessarily in their face every single day. They're not seeking out his press conferences. They're probably not paying attention to his True Social. Maybe they're getting news here and there from things they see on social media. Maybe they're skimming a newspaper now and then. Who knows? But to me, it was very kind of self-destructive for Trump to do that, because I think he kind of put his sort of decrepit condition and, sort of the very disconnected mode of thinking that he engages in, and just kind of rambling and, kind of scary almost in a way, given that he seemed like he was on some sort of upper in front of the nation. And I just can't imagine that played well. I mean, I think, it would have been more to the Trump administration's benefit to kind of keep him more low key and not to sort of put him in the face of, tens of millions of Americans who aren't engaged with him every day like that. And then when your economic message is basically that, foreign leaders, MBS, can't stop telling me how hot America is. It's the hottest country. So don't believe your lying eyes if, if strongman leaders from across the world and oil oligarchs, say that America is the hottest country, it must be true. So the whole thing to me, as I try to think through it in the way that sort of a normal American would, who isn't obsessed with politics or doesn't do this for a living, it just struck me that it was very kind of self-defeating. And that led me again to wondering if like there was more to it, if there was really some sort of plan for, we're bombing Venezuela now, and they pivoted, because the whole thing, aside from that, seemed very pointless, and I couldn't imagine that really playing to Trump's benefit whatsoever.
Speaking to the substance, and it's even hard to use that word, but the thrust maybe of Trump's message, and you were alluding to this, it really is wild. And you have to step back. It really is wild that Trump's message is, you need to believe me and quit whining. And if you can't afford groceries, and if you haven't gotten a raise, and if everything in life is just getting increasingly expensive, you can't buy a home, you can't afford to send your kids to the school you want to send them to, Trump is saying, none of that's true. And that's just unbelievable that he would say that. And also, it's in a way unbelievable that he isn't getting more shit about that, particularly from the traditional media, because we saw Joe Biden and Democrats, when Joe Biden was still in the White House, try to make an argument that the economy was improving. And boy, were Democrats absolutely castigated, saying that, basically being said, you're scolding Americans, you're lying to them, you're not engaging with their lived experience, you're trying to, lecture them and hector them. And of course, that wasn't at all the case. I think Joe Biden was trying to do his best with a very, very bad hand. But Trump is actually doing all of the things Biden was accused of doing. And Biden lost the election because of this crap. And this, I think you're exactly right, Aaron, that now the stuff that we political junkies see all the time, this lying to people about their own experience and the receipts they're getting back at the cash register at the grocery store, Trump is saying that that's all bullshit. And I think that's only going to hurt him with a broader swath of the electorate now.
Yeah, and not only that, I think it's also worth emphasizing that the numbers Trump cites to make the case that things are going well are complete bullshit. I mean, the $18 trillion of investment is completely made up. I mean, these are like paper IOUs that, companies tell him to kind of suck up to him when they're at the White House, like these pharma CEOs were today. Like, it's not based on anything that's real. If that was
It's
actually
like the
happening,
producers.
yeah, it would show up. It would show up in the economic data, and there's been no indication of that whatsoever. And so, that's where I got a little squeamish. I understand what people are trying to convey with the Biden comparisons, because there was a sense in which Biden tried to emphasize that the economy was improving, that relative to the rest of the world, America was doing really well coming out of COVID, all of which was true. But because people didn't feel that, it kind of felt almost insulting to people, and I get that. But at least Biden was sticking with facts and reality, whereas
Right.
Trump is just completely making stuff up. And, I do think there is a sense in which the numerical illiteracy of a lot of Americans, including Trump, plays to his advantage, because, people's eyes kind of glaze over and he talks about $18 trillion. It's like, okay, like that doesn't really compute. But, if you really think through it, the entire GDP of the US is $30 trillion. So he's basically saying that, it's like 60%, our GDP is increasing by 60%, this year because of all these investments. It's just complete nonsense. But, people don't really have the tools to kind of think through it that way. And so, I'm sure Daniel Dale, I didn't see it, but, at CNN, he's their kind of renowned fact checker. That was a very target rich environment for him. I'm sure in that 18-minute speech, there were dozens of lies. But, that's one of the techniques Trump uses to get away with so much stuff, is when you lie at the rate, it's the Gish Gallop, right? You just lie and lie and lie. And by the time someone fact checks the last thing you said, you're on to, 5 different lies that you've told. So it is kind of bewildering, and the media isn't really equipped to confront that either. And so, I got to say, it kind of left me feeling kind of bummed out, because it was such a shabby display that you would like to think something like that could be a needle mover. And we'll see, like, I don't think there's been any polling right after that. I'm not sure if there's any way at this point to gauge whether it was a success or a failure. But, when you see a display like that, it's like, what are we doing here? And it just never seems to really reach ahead like that. Trump just keeps on churning and churning and churning. And so, again, I just question the wisdom of even doing that. It came out of nowhere. He announced it a day in advance with no real agenda for what he was going to talk about. I thought his delivery was pretty much as poor as it possibly could have gone, even, kind of grading on a curve for Trump. And, again, when your character witnesses are kind of these authoritarian strongmen and oil barons, and, you're citing them as, kind of attesting to the quality of your policies and not actual facts and figures on the ground, how this is actually benefiting the lives of your constituents. The other thing that really kind of hit me is that it really speaks to a lot of the criticisms that Marjorie Taylor Greene has been making of Trump, about how he's obsessed with traveling internationally, and he was always on Air Force One. And, you never got to hand it to her, of course, but like, that's kind of been the core of her critique of Trump. She's saying that, instead of being America first, he's, kind of a globalist, so to speak, at least in her lexology. But, but it's kind of true. That's kind of been his obsession. And when you don't have things domestically that you could point to as being indications of success, I think you see how desperate he's becoming. And I just, I hope that people see through that. But, we're a decade into this, so I can't have a ton of confidence that that's the case.
I think that point, and particularly referencing MBS, the leader of Saudi Arabia, uh, saying that, oh, things are so wonderful, America's so hot right now. I think that really speaks to something very, very important that I think is partly blinding Trump and many of his supporters and fellow travelers, which is we really do have an incredibly bifurcated economy right now, where the stock market keeps shooting upward and the gajillionaires keep seeing their portfolios increase every single afternoon. And for them, life couldn't be more swell. And also, the real billionaire oligarchs who believe that by virtue of being so wealthy, they should receive respect and political power, they're getting that now. And Trump is giving that to them. And so, meanwhile, all the rest of us are getting screwed over. And this is something that Trump absolutely can't grapple with because these are the people he's been surrounded with his whole life. And he has always viewed normal Americans with contempt and disgust. I mean, remember his infamous line from his first campaign, "I love the poorly educated." I think that as long as this continues, that makes it even harder and even less likely to see a course correction by Trump and the GOP. Of course, Trump never makes any course corrections himself, but
Yeah.
vulnerable Republicans, as I referenced earlier, we started to see some in the House start to try to separate themselves from the rest of the GOP. But the GOP as a whole is still seems to be delighted with this economy that's going great for the 1%.
Yeah, and it really is kind of the stock market as the final frontier of something that's going well. And I guess my experience, and even from my own perch, I mean, I'm self-employed. Like, my wife has a job that has benefits and things like that. So it's not like I'm out there grinding. I'm not necessarily seeing what it's like. But my sense, just from people, my brother's friends, I have two younger brothers, is that if you're looking for a job right now, it's really grim. Like people aren't really hiring. So if you have a job and it's a stable job that you are okay with, you're probably doing okay. Although now we'll see, in the coming year with the healthcare premium spikes, like, even I think the worst obviously is on the horizon with that, and that's going to affect a lot of people negatively as the calendar turns to 2026. But it seems like you mentioned bifurcated economy, and that's true in the sense that you mentioned it with people who are heavily indexed in the stock market, is good for them. This year was really good for crypto up until basically the government shutdown. And what that really opened my eyes to with crypto is that it kind of seems like it's basically like a Trump vibes measurement. Like when Trump's vibes are up crypto, I mean, it really has been uncanny how it really rides the wave of his approval, where, crypto was at all-time highs right when he was inaugurated again and into the spring. And then, when the shutdown happened and Trump's standing really tanked, that kind of coincided with crypto tanking in a way that even the stock market has not, of course, because the stock market's been hitting new highs pretty regularly. And, people who are smarter than me about this think that it's mainly an AI bubble. But, I mean, I guess we'll see on that. But, it seems to me it's bifurcated not just in that way, but also, if you're someone who is like kind of fresh out of college or early in your professional life, it seems like it's very difficult to find a job. And, we saw an indicator of that this week with the unemployment rate ticking up to 4.6%, which is the highest, I think, since September of 2021. I'm still not really in a disastrous territory. And, on the other side, I will say, we had a new inflation report that came out yesterday that was actually, better than people expected, where it seems like maybe inflation, we were really concerned there about stagflation for a little bit. I don't think we're out of the woods by any means, but it does seem like inflation is at least right now, is at under 3%. So, and that's a good thing. I don't want to see people, completely immiserated. But that is, I think that's one of the tensions that I'm sure you feel it too, is of like, at some point we do need to touch the stove with some of these Trump policies and kind of have real evidence that they are harmful to people. Because he skated most of his first term where people never really felt the pain until COVID, and then even then, they pumped a bunch of money in the economy to make people at least financially feel like they were doing okay. But on the other hand, you don't want to see people totally immiserated either. So I often kind of struggle with that tension of like, is it good if they extend the ACA enhanced subsidies for 3 more years? Yeah, because, that's life and death for people. But on the other hand, it again insulates Republicans from any sort of accountability for these terrible policies that they vote for.
Speaking of stove touching, I feel like you have a few different types of people. First off, based on what we were just saying, you have people who are rich enough or secure enough that they'll never have to touch the stove. And then I think you also have a certain type of true believer who thinks touching the stove is freedom, and they're happy to touch the stove. Please, sir, may I have another? But there are also plenty of people who finally do experience the brunt of these negative policies, and their minds do change. And you referenced this earlier about Trump's speech, the other night. I wouldn't expect to see any major change in the polling overnight as a result of that. But what we have seen is a very steady decline in Trump's overall approval and his approval on just about every major issue of the day, including the ones where the GOP supposedly is strong on, like immigration. And that I feel like that kind of slow change is really more more the kind of thing you should expect in American politics rather than the big overnight shift in views. And this is a particular problem, I think, for the GOP because it's still a long ways away before November 2026. And yes, things could get better for Republicans by then, but I think that odds are much more likely that they continue to get worse for them by then. And right now, you have to think Democrats are the favorite to take back the House. Believe it or not, the Senate is in play, which, I'm not saying that Democrats are the favorites by any means, but, it's definitely something that could happen to see the Senate flip. And, a year from now, I think that things like I said, only likelier to be worse, just because, the GOP just won't accept that they're doing anything wrong. That they view, berating people and shifting messaging as the only responses to negative polls instead of changing what you're actually doing. And
Yeah.
this is going to continue for the rest of this midterm cycle.
Well, there is a little evidence that maybe there are some changes on the margins. I mean, with the discharge positions in the House for the ACA subsidies extension, which hit the critical mass, they needed 4 Republicans to join the Dems, which they got. That was big, because that really undercuts Mike Johnson. It seems like he's kind of completely lost control, at least on the margins of his caucus. Now, I don't really see anybody lining up to want that job. So I think that's kind of it's such a terrible job that, maybe just by sheer force of inertia, he sticks with that. But, and then again, so they're going to vote, I believe, shortly after the new year when the House comes back on that. But then it's probably not going anywhere in the Senate because I think he's only 60. And so I don't think that's happening. But, again, it is significant that he couldn't keep people together on that. And I think, with the stove touching, I think some of these Republicans in swing districts are, if they're not touching the stove right now, they're kind of starting to feel the heat on their palm a little bit. And I think that's part of the reason, you saw guys like Fitzpatrick, who in fairness has been quite critical of Trump throughout this term from Pennsylvania, but some other kind of more moderate members break with Johnson and join the Dems on that. So, but just to kind of back up, because, I think it's maybe worth kind of explaining this to people, although I'm sure our viewers are sophisticated enough for most of them know this. When you mention the Senate being in play next year, there's this isn't just kind of like a vibes thing. It's, when you look at the overperformances that Dems have had, they've been kind of in the range of like, plus 13, plus 15 sort of thing. If you project that onto the Senate map next year, then all of a sudden, some of these states like Florida, maybe, Maine is an easier one, but, there's a number of states where if trends hold from this year and those results replicate themselves next year, then, maybe a state that was like an R+8, suddenly that's right, in the sweet spot where Dems could be competitive. So, I think if I'm sure there are betting lines on this, I haven't looked at them. My assumption would be that the favorite, the Dems are favored to retake the House. I've got to believe that. And they're probably underdogs on the Senate, but it's not, it's not like it wouldn't be a miracle. Like it's very much possible. And, I think you're right to emphasize that. I think we all want to kind of fast forward to the next election, right? Because it's been a pretty rough year this year. And I think, David, in your intro, you really nailed the central kind of, I don't know if dichotomy is the right word, but, it's strange how the more that Trump has kind of consolidated power in a lawless way, in the sense of, just breaking the law. Even today, it's a small example, but, putting his name up on the Kennedy Center, which changing that requires congressional authorization, which he did not get. So it's just completely illegal. It's one of those things where if no one's willing to enforce the law, then what's the law really worth? And I think Trump has really identified those sorts of weaknesses and exploits them, where, he just gets away with everything. And of course, the Supreme Court has pretty much been along for the ride with him. But then, while that's been happening, I think kind of in part, I guess, ironically, because of that it's not popular in a lot of cases. These things that he's doing in the immigration context, sending goons out onto the street to brutalize people, that's undercut his political standing. So, and I think eventually, he didn't consolidate the regime to the point where he's insulated from these, public opinion dynamics. Like, I think the fact that so much of what he's doing is unpopular is ultimately going to undercut his effort to kind of become an autocrat. But I think those chapters have very much yet to be written, and 2026 is going to be very key in that regard, because obviously, you could really turn Trump into a full-on lame duck if Dems retake both chambers. I mean, that's really going to box him up from doing much of anything, and we saw that from 2019 into 21, where Republicans lost. Wait, did they still had the no? They still had the Senate in the second part of Trump's first term, right? Dems won the House in 18, but not the Senate. So this would be kind of, I guess we haven't seen that full dynamic yet, where even obviously judicial picks are blocked, if Dems have the Senate. So that would be obviously, the best case scenario for our democracy. I still think that's kind of a long shot, but even just taking the House, would go a long way to really kind of turning Trump into a lame duck. But it seems like in a way that he wasn't in his first term, he's more willing now to just kind of work outside the confines of the law to do what he wants to do. And unfortunately, I think that's just, unless Republicans get a spine for impeaching and removing, that just feels like a dynamic we're going to have to kind of, hold on to our chairs and just hope that we kind of get through this, and somehow land the plane at the end, because Trump certainly isn't changing in that respect.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And no matter what happens in upcoming elections, it'll be the work of many years to fix what Trump has done. It's going to be incredibly difficult work. A lot of what he's done can't be fixed. There are people who have died as a result of what he's done. He's outright killed people, murdered people, and so there are things that simply cannot be fixed. But I guess my view is I don't want to sound too much like a professional athlete at the post game press conference saying we're just taking it one game at a time. But I am kind of taking it just one election at a time right
Yeah.
now. I think that it's really, really important to stay as focused as we can on the 2026 midterms. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. Trump's unpopularity may not affect his behavior, but it affects the behavior of tons and tons of Americans. And the more unpopular he gets, the more people want to show up at the polls to send a message to Trump and the GOP and say, no mas. And it's angry Democrats who are showing up in great numbers, but it's also people who voted for the GOP and maybe even Trump in the past, switching sides. And then some Republican voters simply feeling dismayed or uninterested and staying home. And all of these have combined for this remarkable political environment where, as you were saying, in these special elections, Democrats are overperforming the presidential results by 13 points, which is an astonishing figure. And the special elections are not a perfect predictor. In 2024, they were way off. Democrats did well in those specials, but did poorly for the most part at the ballot box in the general election. But in many years, like in 2018, they have been quite predictive. We will just have to see. But I think I also want to stress something that I have said all year, and that in fact I said the day after Trump was elected to his second term, which is that we've been having these elections and Republicans have been losing these elections because it's really, really hard to subvert American democracy at its core. And that's because we have this incredibly distributed system of elections that are run by thousands of county clerks. And yes, some of them are terrible people like Tina Peters in Colorado that Trump is trying to jailbreak. But most of them are just hardworking people who just want to do a good job. And they are carrying out these elections, and Republicans haven't been able to subvert them. And yeah, there are crazier, more dangerous things Trump could perhaps try to do next year. But why is he waiting? If he really thought that he could get away with canceling elections or simply installing Republican winners, why not do that in the Wisconsin Supreme Court race where control of the court was up for grabs? Why not do that in Virginia? The answer is that he can't. And so I think that's really, really important to hang on to and remember that as much power as Trump has consolidated, there are certain areas of American institutions that are very, very hard to corrupt. And we should be incredibly grateful for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's a great point. And we may have even had occasion last week to briefly touch upon this, but I thought the example of the Indiana Republicans, who of course rejected the gerrymandering effort there, I thought that was very telling because there had been a lot of threats coming their way about, oh, we're going to defund Indiana and all this stuff, and then that went away immediately, right? I mean, Trump backed down when he was asked about it that day. He was basically like, "Well, I wasn't even really involved. I didn't really care," which I think kind of shows. I mean, that there are times where his threats are really scary because I mean, and that was the case there, where a lot of those Republicans had swatting attempts and all sorts of crazy things happening because Trump fans got mad at them, the crazy Trumpers. But in a lot of cases, Trump, he talks a big game, but he doesn't always back that up with action. And I am concerned. He's been rattling. He's been kind of working on Republicans to eliminate the filibuster, and I think part of what he envisions is that they're going to do some sort of comprehensive election rigging bill. I mean, he'll call it like the Election Freedom Act or something like that. But I think he has visions that he could use that to ram through with just Republican votes, some sort of voter suppression or ways to kind of tamper with elections that would work in his favor. But even then, I mean, we've seen that because a lot of the stuff he's doing is unpopular. There was a lot of angst and concern about these Republican gerrymandering slash redistricting efforts this year, and it kind of came to naught. In part because Democrats fought back effectively, but also because Trump has. At the same time, he's been trying to do that, become more unpopular in a way where, if you steal two seats basically, and it's a D plus 8 to 10 election, like the wave is still going to be higher than those two seats that you stole. So public opinion does still matter. And, I'm glad that as we come out of this year, there was a lot of doom and gloom in January, February, when you had like the procession of the oligarchs to the White House for the inauguration, all the tech titans who were there, and Trump kind of browbeating the universities, forcing them into these weird settlements, or even the media companies. And still obviously we saw last weekend like the Erica Kirk town hall on CBS News, how thoroughly corrupted some formerly reputable institutions have become, and that is really a bummer. But I think the scariness factor it's become kind of like tragicomical more than like terrifying as we come out of this year. And so, I do my sense, very subjectively, of just kind of my hopefulness and kind of sense of where our politics are at. I feel like we're in a better place now than we were February and March. And so I'm at least, it's kind of a thin read, but I'm at least grateful for that it feels like, Democrats have kind of gotten off the map. As you've covered extensively in the down ballot, I mean, every single contested election has been a Democratic overperformance, basically, with a lot of victories mixed in there, some in very unlikely contexts like statewide in Georgia. And so I think we've seen that, if there's any notion that Trump was kind of inevitable, that the 2024 election was like this sea change where Republicans were ascendant and Dems were smashed, and it was going to have to be an entirely reconstituted party to ever have electoral success again. That was not the case. It was a weird year last year. Kind of feels in hindsight like sort of a perfect storm of factors. It's still nothing I will ever be able to make sense of. I just can't believe that Trump, after January 6th and everything we endured in his first term, won again. I'll never be able to make sense of that. But again, I'm at least, now that we're a year into it and the lame duckification has begun. And when we have this conversation a year from now, it'll be coming off a midterm cycle that I think will go well for Democrats. And by then, we'll be talking about, J.D. Vance versus Marco Rubio.
Right.
And I look forward to having those conversations because then, the end is really in sight. And we've already seen some of that. I mean, last night, Erica Kirk endorsed J.D. Vance at America Fest, which if I was even more of a sicko, I would watch this weekend. I'm not going to watch that this weekend. I mean, it's Vance, I think, is the keynote. It's like the Lollapalooza for Trumpers, basically, in Arizona. It's kind of supplanted CPAC, which I used to watch every year religiously,
Right.
and still have as recently as this year, as like the premier right wing event. But it's the holidays. I mean, I'm so committed to
Don't.
having I'm so committed to having a good weekend this weekend that I'm skipping the Trump rally tonight. He's in North Carolina, which I thought was kind of odd. It's like he's having a rally like Christmas, basically. Like, what's going on
Yeah.
with that? But
Huh.
in any event, so I do look forward to a year from now having those conversations about kind of the jockeying for whatever's coming next leading up to 2028, because then we'll really know that Trump is a lame duck.
I saw a really funny tweet. I wish I could remember who sent it. That Erica Kirk endorses Erica Kirk for First Lady.
Yes, I know. I mean, I don't know. I feel bad going there. The
We
one
don't have
image,
to.
well, the one image of like JD Vance kind of sort of hugging her, but he's kind of got her hips a little bit in a way that
And
looks kind of suggestive.
and
You've
she
probably
has
seen
his
it.
hand behind his head.
Yeah, I mean, if you watch that in context, I think the video of it doesn't look quite as bad as that still image does, like taken from, one moment in time, so sort of thing. But who knows, man? I mean, I was getting texts about, Usha Vance had some public appearances where she wasn't wearing her wedding ring, and like I don't know, Teen Bot magazine or something. Like I don't really enjoy that aspect of our politics, but we kind of miss that. This is sort of a side note, but I was thinking about this the other day that during Trump's first term, we got these kind of like tabloid style Maggie Haberman. Like I was in the meeting and Ivanka spoke up and had ejections, and so did Jared. And that is one of the ways in which I think this is a tighter operation this time around, is that we don't get the leaks that we used to get, which led to these really compelling accounts we'd read in the Washington Post, New York Times. I guess we did get the Susie Wiles
I was
stories,
about to
which
say Susie Wiles, dude.
yes, which was really fascinating. And I've seen a lot of speculation about like, did that really, was she just like completely off the chain there? Or was there some sort of deeper thing going on? Like, is she really planning to leave? The thing that's been notable in the fallout from that, to me at least, is that the Wagans have been circled very quickly, where everybody was on message that day. Oh, Susie's great. I love working with her. She's a great boss. So it doesn't seem like she's on the way out, but it was just so weird. Some of those quotes. The thing about Trump having the personality of an alcoholic, and then I believe it was either that same day or the next day was his primetime speech, where it was like he was on, it was like he set out to try to prove that point or something. Like he seemed so kind of disheveled and unhinged and kind of altered that it was like, yeah, I see exactly what she was talking about. So yeah, very very odd.
So we forgot to mention that we always love taking your questions. If you are a paid subscriber to either Aaron's site, Public Notice, or my site, The Down Ballot, you can drop your questions in the chat box at the bottom. And I saw that we had a question about this DNC quote unquote autopsy report. And I don't have especially strong feelings about it, but in case you didn't see, an autopsy to be a very strange word. There's no corpse involved here, but maybe an after action report is the best one. So you may have seen that the DNC had been working on a report about what went wrong in 2024, and then announced this week that they simply weren't going to release it, allegedly because DNC Chair Ken Martin thought that it would step on the streak of Democratic victories. Honestly, I thought this was incredibly stupid. I mean, just release the thing. People will
Yeah,
forget it
I'm
the
with you.
next day. Now instead they've made a bigger deal of it, and it's probably someone will leak it eventually. Like, control the narrative, be grown up, just own this. I kind of suspect that maybe there were some big donors who were, the work of the groups funded by the big donors was probably going to be called out, and so there's probably some sensitivities around that. But just put on your big boy pants, put this out there, just get it done. And also, the thing you got to remember is, and you were alluding to this earlier, Aaron, don't fight the last war. And
Yeah.
we saw in the first part of the year so many stories in the media about Democrats are going to have to tear everything down and start all over again for an election that was incredibly close, 1.5 points. And that never made sense at the time. They were treating it like it was a 1936 style, FDR-esque repudiation of an entire political party and movement. That wasn't even close to what had happened. And what we've seen that be proven true by the events of the past year, of Democrats getting their mojo back at the ballot box. And shockingly, Hakeem Jeffries, for all of his flaws and all of the times where he's put his foot in his mouth or not said the right thing or not fought aggressively enough, absolutely boxing in Mike Johnson, leading to this latest discharge petition. And there have been multiple
Yeah.
discharge petitions that have screwed over Mike Johnson, something that hasn't happened since like the 1930s, apparently. So yeah, the Dems should have just put this out there. I suspect we'll see it in some version at some point, but the whole thing is stupid.
No, I'm with you. And I saw another comment about, because there was some polling that came out this week showing approval for congressional Dems like at an all-time low, which is not good. But to me, that's more kind of the dynamics of their situation than, like big failures on their part. Now, I kind of go back and forth in this because I'm sure you've seen this too, David, where like there are still people who, you mentioned fighting the last battle, who still kind of are relitigating the shutdown in the sense that, obviously Dems kind of caved on that. And the idea was then they'd get this vote on healthcare. which didn't really go anywhere. Although now there's this discharge position that will force a vote in the House. So the healthcare is still going to be on the agenda and a big topic next month. So I guess you could look at it and say that because there was some polling in October that showed Dems, really kind of doing much better in terms of like the generic polling than they had been. So maybe in that sense, there was kind of some political malpractice there. Although to me, we talked earlier a little bit about like the stove touching aspect. It really put Republicans in a spot to have to own these premium spikes that people are going to be experiencing in a way that I think will probably pay dividends politically next year for Dems. So I think it's too soon to sort of, kind of really put Schumer on blast for the way he handled the end of the shutdown because they couldn't get an extension of ACA subsidies. Like, that's still, maybe things will get so bad healthcare wise that Republicans will be forced to kind of change course on that. But I don't put a ton of stock into that sort of polling. Now, I will say with the autopsy report, I'm with you that they should have released it because, I've seen a lot of people kind of now pushing conspiracy theories about why they're not releasing it. Oh, was it Gaza? What are they trying to cover up here as the reason that they're not releasing this? And that's not a helpful news cycle for anybody. So I have to imagine it would have been a pretty, kind of staid document. I don't think there's going to be a lot of like hot takes in there. I don't really see any reason, especially over kind of a holiday season where the news, in theory, at least is a little bit slower. Kind of put it out there, just let people dissect it. I don't think there was going to be any, kind of game changers in there, would be my strong suspicion. So yeah, that's a little bit unfortunate. I mean, of course, I knew Ken Martin going back to his days in Minnesota. He used to have a podcast that he did with a good friend of mine that was like a DFL podcast that I went on a couple times. And I knew him even before that when I was a reporter at the City Pages here. And, I've always really liked him personally. And, I've seen mostly kind of negative reviews of his tenure so far. Although when you kind of look at the bottom line of elections, like the resume is pretty strong, right? I mean, you couldn't really have much of a stronger year than he had in 2025, in terms of the results. Now, the DNC isn't necessarily involved in every single election across the country, so you can't really give him credit for that. But you could certainly give him credit if Democrats were losing a lot of elections or coming up short, and that hasn't been the case. But I will say that particular judgment, if he was one who made the call on not releasing the report, I do disagree with that. But this is something that people will forget about in a couple weeks. And they could still change course on that and decide to release it. I think that would probably still be the right thing to do.
Totally. Well, I think that probably a good time to wind up. Aaron, was there anything else you did we get any drops of the Epstein files chat while we were on this live stream?
I'm assuming someone would have come forward with that.
I would hope so.
My suspicion is, the way the law is written, they have until 11:59. We'll probably get it at 11:59. It would be, why would not? I mean, of course, this is how Trump people operate. Time it for like the ultimate Friday news dump where it's literally like the last second of the day, get it out there. Although again, like, I really wonder if they just said, F you, we're not releasing it. Would anybody be able to do anything about that? I mean, I do kind of question that where we just see Trump day. I mean, it would go to the courts, but, if there's no mechanism to compel them to do it, ultimately, I mean, the way that the Constitution is written, I mean, ultimately impeachment is the remedy for a lawless, administration. And we're nowhere near that point yet. I think the thing that would really get us there is if we had a lot of like economic calamity where, then maybe Republicans would feel some heat. But we're not there yet. So in any event, I'm not seeing anything in the chat. So I'm assuming that we're clear on Epstein. So I'll take this opportunity as we wind down to wish everybody a very happy holidays. Thank you for joining us throughout this entire year of 2025 for Nir and Rupar. I believe we started the show almost exactly a year ago now. It was like January, February, somewhere in there. So coming up on a year. Some programming notes at the end of the year. We're going to take the next 2 weeks off because next week is the week after Christmas. We'll give everybody a break from an hour of politics talk. And then the next week, I believe, is the day after New Year's. So we're going to take that off as well. And then David has a vacation, well earned after such a year of in-depth coverage of all these different elections that we've talked about throughout the year. So he will be gone for the following 2 Fridays, but I am going to continue in his absence. I am planning for Jan 9, and I will promote this in public notice as the date draws near, doing kind of an interactive mailbag where I will put out a call ahead of time and have some questions kind of queued up, and then take live questions as we do during this show as well. And we'll see how that goes. If it goes well, maybe Dave and I will do that at some point upon his return to have even more listener involvement. And then one of those weeks too, if I don't do a mailbag like that both weeks, I will get a guest to host along with me. I mean, I was just going through the Substack politics leaderboard. I know pretty much most everyone, other than like Bari Weiss and the Free Press. I won't ask
Yeah,
them,
that's
but
okay. That's okay.
there's certain Michael Schellenberger and I guess Glenn Greenwald was no longer on Substack. He's on like Rumble now, so I don't have to worry
Oh,
about him.
good,
But
good, good.
I'm not going to do like the debate, the combat debate that some shows are.
Oh,
I'll get someone
yeah.
who's kind of I've actually been getting a lot of offers to go on Piers Morgan's show, including one which I accepted, and then they were kind of like, "Oh, we got
What?
someone else." I was like, "Yeah." I didn't actually end up going on because they
Yeah.
changed plans, but yeah, I don't know. I was kind of two minds. I was on. I've talked to a couple people where I guess like he does have quite a big audience, and so I was like, well, there's not really any harm in going on, but it has not happened yet. But I'm not going to do that. I will bring someone on who we can have
Good man.
substantive. We'll have the type of conversation Dave and I have where we drill down on the issues and not kind of fight with each other the whole time. So let me one final time this year remind you that if you enjoy this podcast, please sign up to the Down Ballot. That's David's phenomenal publication. I believe I even recently, when I was going through your homepage, clicked on your archives, which I think go all the way back to 2003.
Yes.
So you can go all the way back, and it's kind of, it was very, to me at least, kind of heartwarming to see your earliest post, because it's in that very old school internet format where it's like just text, you got like
Yep.
it's like a blog basically.
It was.
Yeah, but it really took me back because I remember reading a lot of content that was in that format when I was in college, which I was back then.
Okay.
But so David's gonna be obviously a busy year for you next year as well. So get in ahead of time at the Down Ballot. Likewise with Public Notice, I got a number of Q&As lined up for over the holidays, and I'm really not even slowing down very much at all. I've got some fresh stuff lined up for next week. We're going to have to cover the Epstein file situation for Monday, so I'm kind of waiting to see what happens, but we'll cover that over the weekend too. So one final time in 2025, happy holidays to everyone. Have a great new year. David, have a great vacation. I'm sure I'll talk to you before then via text, but we'll see you in about a month. And for everybody else, I will see you here on January 9th. So until then, take care.
Take care.